Nikia Dillard ate fast food every day. Mostly McDonald's because it was nearby, affordable, and, well, fast food was the only thing available to her. She lived in an impoverished, underserved neighborhood called West Oakland, jammed into a small area between four freeways. Malika Edwards and Leander Sellers were earning their degrees in environmental studies at Oberlin College. Community activists, they researched neighborhoods around the country that were classified as food deserts, areas with no grocery stores. West Oakland at the time had 30,000 residents and an abundance of places to buy gas, lottery tickets, and cigarettes, but the only produce you could find was an expensive banana or apple at the Quickie Mart. It seemed to be the most likely location to support a crazy idea they had. Upon graduation in 2002, they moved to the Bay Area and quickly met Brahm Amati, a recent graduate from UC Berkeley, a guy who had similar crazy ideas. They began by planting community gardens on vacant lots and odd spaces around the neighborhood, drawing in local residents to share in the work and the rewards. Their goal was to teach their friends and neighbors skills and to help them dream about what is possible with little or no money. They wanted people to be healthier, more attuned with the earth, and more financially secure. Nikia Dillard connected with them and got her mom, who was an ailing diabetic, involved, and their lives were transformed. After a while, they teamed up with a couple designers to secure and trick out a box truck for use as a mobile grocery store. Imagine an ice cream truck, painted with street art, blasting hip hop music. But instead of serving popsicles, they were selling beets, quinoa, kale, strawberries, brown rice, and tofu. They called their truck the People's Grocery, and it was the first of its kind. Their model got a lot of attention, and the truck was featured in national publications like the urbanist modern design magazine Dwell. The Center for Health Journalism described the People's Grocery as using a cross-sectoral strategy of bringing grassroots organizing and street-level marketing together with socially responsible business and agricultural practices to positively impact problems facing their neighborhood. I met them in 2004 when I was in seminary studying local models of justice-oriented nonprofits that could serve as role models for Unitarian Universalist community ministries. After a few Saturdays working at Urban Gardens, I was invited to do two things: design and build an inexpensive shade structure that could serve as a template for multiple gardens, and to attend a special lunch prepared by star chef Alice Waters of the renowned Chez Panisse restaurant. I'd always dreamed of eating there, but I couldn't afford it, so I went. It turned out to be a fundraiser where everyone was asked to pledge $50 or more per month to the cause. It would have been cheaper to eat at the restaurant. But the food was simple and sublimely delicious. Microgreen salads with pickled root vegetables and heirloom tomatoes, sauteed squashes with the most decadent olive oil and hand-churned butter. Every dish included ingredients harvested from the urban garden. Folks from the neighborhood who were sharing a table with me were unimpressed. They hardly nibbled anything, and they got up ceremoniously and announced that they were going to KFC for some real food. I'm guessing they didn't pledge. I learned a lot from that experience about meeting people where they are, providing assistance they want in a way that honors them and their lives. Brahm and Malika also learned. They closed down their hip-hop food truck in 2006 because it couldn't turn a profit. An issue of scale, they said. But within a couple of years, they opened the bricks and mortar community foods market, seeking to engage the neighborhood and support them in making healthier food choices gradually that, Brahms said, means carrying the products they're familiar with and looking for. They give a 50% discount on fresh produce to customers using California's equivalent of WIC. Their community gardens are growing, despite the pressures of gentrification in the wildly expensive Bay Area. Other cooperative grocery stores have also opened, and West Oakland is no longer a food desert. Meanwhile, organizations in other cities like New York, New Orleans, Portland, Seattle, and even Cleveland have all learned from the People's Grocery to begin similar programs in their neighborhoods. And Nakia Dillard and her mom are healthier than ever.
For the beauty of the earth, for the splendor of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of ear and eye, for the heart and mind's delight, for the mystic harmony, linking sense to sound and sight. Source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the wonder of each hour of the day and of the night, hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of light. Source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of human care, sister, brother, parent, child, for the kinship we all share, for all gentle thoughts and mild. Source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise.
It all started with a promise they made to a dog. John was a cameraman on wildlife projects. Molly was a chef and blogger preaching the gospel that the health of our food is determined by how it's grown. They imagined themselves having a farm where they raised everything traditionally, in harmony with nature. One day, John was called out to document animal control as it removed 200 dogs from one home. While filming the horror, he fell in love with a black Great Pyrenees and brought him home. They named him Todd, and they promised that theirs would be his last home. But they lived in a small apartment, and it soon became clear that it wasn't going to work, so they stepped up their plans. They did research, talked to dozens of farmers, and wrote a business plan. Every one of those farmers told them that attempting to farm in harmony with nature wasn't just crazy, it was reckless. But they found investors who saw this old way of farming as the future. They bought Apricot Lane Farm, 200 plus acres of monocrop where the irrigation pond had been dry for decades. There were no insects or vermin in the rock-hard soil. It had turned to desert. Nothing lived in it. It was dead. But Todd loved it. They didn't know where to begin, so they hired Alan York, a world-renowned expert whose mantra was diversify, diversify, diversify. He said that with more diversity of plants, livestock, and wildlife, everything would work together to emulate a natural ecosystem regulating itself. They ripped out the half-dead apricot trees and installed miles of irrigation pipes. They built a state-of-the-art worm compost system that brewed tea to feed back into the soil. They planted 75 different varieties of stone fruit, among other crops. Volunteers came all over the world to learn how to farm, as John and Molly learned from Alan. In transforming this desert, they wanted to use only their fair share of water. So they rebuilt the pond and stocked it with fish and ducks and geese. Then they added to the system chickens, goats, sheep, and a pig that nearly died giving birth to 17 babies. They nursed her back to life the way they were nursing their land back to life, by infusing it with microorganisms. Just as the trees were yielding fruit and they could sell 50 dozen eggs in an hour, Alan died of cancer when John and Molly needed him most. You see, they wanted a diverse ecosystem with plants, livestock, and wildlife all working together, and they got it. The farm became a habitat for cranes, starlings, hummingbirds, moles, gophers, and caterpillars. The starlings were amazing at sunset, flying formation in great clouds. They ate some of the snails, but they also ate bits of the fruit, just enough to make 70% unsuitable for market. All of the wildlife were doing damage because their numbers were completely out of control. John and Molly felt like they were growing fruit for the sole purpose of feeding the birds. Then the coyotes came, killing nearly all of the chickens and their primary source of income. Every step they took to improve the land created the perfect habitat for another species that turned out to be a pest. By year 3, it all felt like chaos. They were disillusioned. They were ready to give up. Then one day, John realized that Todd the dog was always watching, as if he were trying to figure out the system. So he started watching too, and step by step, hatched a plan. They trained Todd and the other dogs to protect the chickens from the coyotes, so the coyotes turned their attention to the gophers, who were killing the fruit trees at their roots as they aerated the soil. Owl houses attracted predators of gophers and small birds. Ducks were dying in the pond because of algae blooms created by their poop, so he moved them to the orchards where they ate all the snails. With the snails gone, the starlings didn't dive bomb the crops. Plus, the ducks left great fertilizer, which became filled with maggots that the chickens gobbled up, managing the fly population. Things were getting under control. But then, after the worst drought in 1,200 years, the rain finally fell, all at once, 18 inches. The topsoil on surrounding farms just washed out to sea. But Apricot Lane Farm, the water stayed on the property, absorbed by the cover crop, replenishing their aquifer. John said, "Sometimes I wish it weren't true, but it's those tiny revelations that are born from failure that act as fuel for the engine of our ecosystem." Todd doesn't care about any of this. He's just happy to watch the ducks and play with the geese.
On the first part of the journey, I was looking at all the light, There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rings. The first thing I met was a fly with a buzz and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out in the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain. La la la, la 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 la. After 2 days in the summer sun, my skin began to turn red. After 3 days in the desert fun, I was looking at a riverbed, and the story it told of a river that flowed made me sad to think it was dead. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out in the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain. La la la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. 9 days I let the horse run free, 'cause the desert had turned to sea. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rings. The ocean is a desert with its life underground and a perfect disguise above. Under the city lies a heart made of ground, but the humans will give no love. Been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out in the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain. La la la, la 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 la.
I grew up gardening beside my grandmother and her sister, who were founding members of Cleveland's Garden Center in the 1920s, now the Botanic Garden. Their gardening roots predated the mid-century so-called Green Revolution, in which chemical intervention came to be accepted as an improvement upon natural systems. They were not immune to the siloed thinking characteristic of the 20th century in all things scientific, but were inspired by Ruth Stout's 1963 book, Gardening Without Work, the experiences and work of Helen and Scott Nearing, and Organic Farming and Gardening magazine, published by what became Rodale Institute. Indeed, the landscape that surrounds me today was established by my grandparents in the 60s Back to the Land movement and enabled all of us to live quite frugally and sustainably. So perhaps it's no surprise that discovering permaculture felt like a great converging of the beliefs and practices of my forebears. I sit here in the idyllic setting orchestrated by my grandparents and parents, in which I grew up and of which I am now steward. And I tell you a story that my grandparents would have loved, about a coincidental earth care pattern on a vast scale of size and time. Repeating patterns are a hallmark of permaculture philosophy. And in this story, we see earth care at a micro level, mimicking natural evolutionary patterns occurring at a macro level. My friend Jonathan Hull is a gardener, farmer, and author, and co-founder of Green Triangle, a Cleveland-based nonprofit that creates social, economic, and ecological sustainability through permaculture. A few years ago, this story emerged for him as he explored the basis for effectiveness of foliar sprays on his vegetable crops. Jonathan has a scientific and curious nature. He has the patience and precision to implement complicated and detailed practices. So when he followed an elaborate foliar spray protocol that yielded impressive results, he wondered why. It didn't seem to make sense because we consider plants' roots to be the primary vehicle for nutrient uptake. As he delved into the evolution of plant leaves to seek answers, he was led to ponder the contradiction of the Amazon rainforest. This famously lush ecosystem emerges out of soil that actually is notably poor. The frequent and often heavy rains wash nutrients like phosphorus away to the ocean. In northern lands, glaciers brought rich mineral deposits to support forests, but near the equator, the loss of nutrients ought to have a limiting effect on growth. The vibrant life of the forest consumes leaf litter at a fast pace, which helps to retain nutrients, but where do they come from? The surprising explanation is windborne dust from Africa. As Jonathan says, how wondrous that two biomes at such complete extremes and separated by an ocean of water can be so intimately connected. Equally incredible is the set of finely tuned processes that allows for this instance of global nutrient cycling. A further set of coincidences makes this even more surprising. The most nourishing dust falling on the Amazon comes from a specific region of Africa called the Bodele Depression at the south edge of the Sahara Desert. This small mountain-rimmed depression was the lowest point of Paleolithic Lake Megachad. As the water was depleted by climatological factors and later also by irrigation, the mineral-rich sediments turned to dust. The particular orientation of the mountains on the edge focuses strong winter winds to create a wind tunnel that scoops up this dust into a pattern of westerly trade winds that carry it across the ocean to the Amazon. NASA scientists estimate an astonishing 500,000 tons of dust per day are mobilized from the Bodele Depression in average winter windstorms. The Amazon receives 40 million tons of windborne dust per year from Africa, half of which comes from this area that makes up only 0.2% of the Sahara Desert. The remains of aquatic animals make this dust particularly high in bioavailable phosphorus, accounting for the extraordinary vigor of the Amazon forests. Jonathan's examination of leaf evolution revealed the complex and elegant mechanism by which plants are able to process significant nutrients through their leaves. And the nuances of the protocol he was following to spray nutrients in his vegetable garden coincided with the best aspects of conditions that had influenced leaf evolution. This earth care story captures the grandest and the smallest scale in which we can learn from and interact with natural processes, illustrating how observation brings us to mind-shifting discoveries about our world.
Okay, Toulouse, we're ready. Go ahead. What? No, you don't want to? Well, Toulouse woke me up this morning just a few minutes ago, and he was all excited. Daddy, I want to do this part of the service, he said. And now that I set up the camera and we're ready to go, he's clammed up. What, are you too shy now? Well, if he were ready to say it, what Toulouse would say is, thank you for continuing to support East Shore through this time of physical separation. He really misses everybody, but he's really, really glad that you're continuing to send in your pledge checks. If you're new to East Shore, I want to ask you to please consider sending in a small amount, whatever you can afford right now, to help support the work and mission of this church, so we can continue to be here for you and for each other and for the whole world. I thank you. Toulouse thanks you.
The Summer Day by Mary Oliver. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
We join hands in unitarian Universalist fellowship, pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom which transcends all creeds, not to think alike, but to journey together.